All right, so welcome to microbiology. This is going to be the first chapter here we're looking at. And what is on this slide is a picture of the textbook that we are using. This is a new textbook. It's a lot more approachable, a lot more understandable, I feel. So I'm really excited about it. This is the third edition. If you get the fourth edition, if you buy it and you go online, you can get the bundle there with the virtual lab for $110. Fourth edition is going to be just fine. Okay. Then if you do that, you also get, you can also have exercises in Connect. Okay. And if you do that and you need to access those and you can't find them, let me know and I'll set some up. Okay. It has a lot of really, really good features here. Be sure to pay attention to the graphics and use them because they will really help you understand the concepts. And that's one of the reasons I chose this book, because the graphics are so good. You also need to really be sure you pay attention to the NCLEX style questions that are embedded throughout the book, because the majority of my students that are taking this class are doing so because they're going into a medical profession, most of them going into nursing. All right. And so some of those type of questions will even be on the exam, and some of them throughout the PowerPoints I will go through. And so you can do those as you read the chapter. And it's really, really important that you do read the chapter. Okay. Microbiology deals with living things, a few non-living things that are too small to be seen with the naked eye, hence the word micro. We're going to look at several different types or categories of microorganisms. These can be cellular or non-cellular, in other words, or we could say acellular. The cellular microorganisms that we're going to be studying are going to fall into categories like bacteria, archaea, fungi, different protozoa. We're also going to study a few things that are not microorganisms but have part of their life cycle in the microscopic realm, and those are going to be the helminths. Okay, these are multicellular parasites, in other words, parasitic worms. All right. We have acellular organisms. Those are going to be things like viruses and prions. So I don't leave these in every PowerPoint because these are embedded in your textbook. These are really very important to help you. If it was me taking this course, I would go through at the beginning of the chapter and I would look at, I'm looking to see where they're at. I would look at these objectives, okay, and I would use that as a study guide. So as I read, I would answer or do whatever these objectives say to help me study, okay? And so 11.1, or well, let's start with 1.1. I'm skipping all the way to 11. So on the first page of the chapter, it says list the various types of microorganisms that can colonize humans. Okay, so I would keep that in mind as I am reading, and I would make myself a little chart. This is a really good way to study and will work in every course that you take. Okay, these objectives are what you are expected to learn. All right. And especially for a class that doesn't give you study guides, this can be your study guide. Okay. Now, I do give study guides, but the way I would approach it is I would sit down as I am reading, and that gives you intention while you're in reading. So you're not just falling asleep while you're reading. Okay. Even though a lot of this is really quite interesting. But it gives you something to look for, and you read with intent. And so you'll learn better that way. Okay. And so we're going to look at these different types of things, the role and impact of microbes on Earth, how the theory of evolution, or what the theory of evolution is and how it applies, okay? How humans manipulate organisms, these microorganisms, and use them for our own practical uses, all right? So this is really helpful. Let's see, there should be another one coming up, I believe. And so again, here are some really important things here, okay? Differentiate among bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotic microorganisms. So that's telling you that you need to know what is similar and what is different about these three categories, okay? And so compare and contrast is kind of the same thing, but differentiate means if I give you characteristics of one, you need to be able to tell me which one it is, okay? Or which one it's not, all right? So use these as you go through the course to help you focus your reading in and to study and get prepared. This class is going to move very quickly, and so I really recommend that you go through, you read, and you do this, all right? that is going to help you have a lot of this down. Then when you listen to the lectures, you can listen for the things that you didn't understand or that you didn't find, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter which order you do it in, but you do need to do both. So when you hear the word microbe, what do you think? Do you think germ? What is a germ? Okay, we talk about germs as things that make us sick, but a germ is really just a rapidly growing cell, which does apply to many microbes, but not all um, germs are going to make you sick. Okay, it's just a rapidly growing cell. Okay, so microbiology is, of course, that area of biology that deals with living things that we can't see without special magnification. Okay, we have lots of different classes, actually 7 here that we're going to be looking at of microorganisms. It's going to be bacteria, archaea, protozoa, fungi, helminths, viruses, and algae. Okay, some algae can actually be based in the plant realm, but we're going to be looking at microscopic algae here. So you may be thinking, why on earth do I need to study microbiology? Well, I think this is probably, for someone in the health field, the one of the top 2 classes that you can have as far as your information before you go into a nursing program or whatever. This is very important, very relevant. This is even very relevant for someone that is not in a health major's occupation. Okay, microbes are all around us. These can be harmful. They can do things like cause food spoilage or disease, but we don't often realize that many more of them are actually very beneficial. So these are actually helpful in commercial, medical, and industrial applications. What? Industrial? Yep, that's right. So there's many unexpected ways that microbes actually affect us. Um, some things here that are interesting are there was a study that found that changes in the bacteria present in the vagina are actually associated with a mother's waters breaking early, okay, and causing preterm birth. So that's a very unexpected way. They have, like I said, we have those pathogenic or disease causing microbes. We have so many that are not. We have microbes that act as decomposers. They decompose or break down organic waste, which is very important in the environment. Okay. Some are actually producers, which is on the opposite end of a food web or in an ecosystem. Okay. Because they actually do photosynthesis. All right. They were actually some of the first photosynthesizers, and we'll talk about that later on in chapter 1. They can actually produce industrial chemicals like ethanol and acetone. They can produce fermented foods like vinegar, cheese, bread. They can be used in manufacturing for things like cellulose, treatment of disease. We actually can manipulate bacteria and to make them produce insulin, okay, which is pretty cool. All right, so there's lots of different things here. These are just a few little articles about things in recent years that we've discovered with microbes. So there's lots of study going on. This is a very emerging field of study. So as I've already kind of stated, this basically restates most of what I just said, but the understanding microorganisms is very, very important to participate in medicine and any health-related science, and obviously even some industrial applications, okay? It allows us to understand and prevent food spoilage, prevent disease occurrence, and it has helped us to come up with aseptic, the study of microbiology has helped us to come up with aseptic techniques which basically prevent us from having contamination in medicine laboratories, but also in contaminating our patients. In other words, from carrying something from one patient to another and distributing it to them. That is very important. Okay, so microbes are kind of interesting. They reproduce very, very quickly. And so they can be grown into very, very large populations in the lab. So that makes them kind of easy to study, but in other ways, they're harder to study because we can't really see them directly. We have to analyze them through an indirect means. In other words, we have to view them through the microscope. And then sometimes we have to do different dyes and things to them to manipulate what we see so that we can differentiate between them. So it's kind of a conundrum, easy but hard to study. Microbes have actually helped shape the development of Earth's habitat for billions of years. Single-celled organisms first appeared 3.8 million years ago. these guys differentiated into what we now call the three domains. Okay, these three domains came about from a single common ancestor, we believe, and those three domains are going to be very important for classification or categorizing our microbes. These three domains are going to be eukaryota, bacteria, and archaea. Okay, so what are these things? Well, eukaryotes. This is the class that we belong in. We are eukaryotes, okay? Eu means true, and kary or means kernel or true nucleus, all right? Bacteria and archaea do not have a nucleus, and so we call them prokaryotes, which means before the nucleus, okay? And so bacteria are single-celled, no true nucleus. Archaea are single-celled, no true nucleus, but they are very different than bacteria, so they get their own little kingdom. I'm sorry, their own little domain. Don't fall for that. Kingdoms are inside of a domain. Okay, so here we see the tree of life, and this is basically a diagram of all the organisms on planet, or they're going to fall into these three categories, these three domains, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. All right. And so here you can see what we are more familiar with in eukarya. This is what we kind of live in our world, and that we can see animals, fungi like mushrooms, plants. Okay, some of these other guys here are much smaller. Okay, we do have a few things in archaea that we will look at. Most archaeans, or as far as we know, no archaeans actually can make us sick, but we'll study them a little bit. And then we also, of course, have our realm here of bacteria, where we're going to spend a majority of our time. All right, we will have our helminths are going to be over here in eukarya, and then we have two things here that are not going to show up. Okay, and that's going to be our viruses and prions, because they are not considered living at all. So if this is the tree of life, then they can't fall in this category. So let's look at the difference between, or what the difference is between these three categories, okay? Bacteria and archaea are single-celled, very, very simple organisms, all right? Yet they are a little more complex metabolically. Eukaryotes they do have single-celled organisms, but many are very, very complex, multicellular organisms. They're going to be much, much larger, things like worms and humans, okay? So when we're talking about prokaryotes, we want to look at that on the scale of evolutionary time, which is a very long span of time. The first prokaryotes appeared about 3.5 million years ago. They were the only form of life for about half of Earth's history. So they have been around a very, very long time. Eukaryotes appeared only about 1.8 billion years ago. Then insects 500 million years ago. Followed by reptiles, mammals, and then finally humans. Okay, so on the scale in the figure, humans are the most recently to have appeared. Okay, and so haven't been around near as long as some of these other critters here. Microbes are what we call ubiquitous. Well, what does ubiquitous means? That means it's pretty much everywhere. They're found everywhere, and they're actually found in places that we never thought they could survive, especially in the past 15, 20 years. We have discovered they survive in areas that when I was in high school, so to say, we were told that they could not survive there. Okay, so they are found everywhere from deep in the Earth's crust to the polar ice caps to thermal deep sea vents. We actually thought that was way too hot, that nothing could survive there, but we were wrong. They're found living inside bodies of plants, inside bodies of animals, in certain relationships. Sometimes they're going to be harmful, sometimes they're beneficial to both. All right, symbiotic relationships. But they also play a fundamental role on Earth, and they are essential to life on Earth. So we can't just get rid of all the microbes. And remember, not all microbes are bad. Actually, most of them are very important and very helpful. All right, so we need to understand the theory of evolution, because microbes are always evolving and changing. Evolution, the basic way to define that is just change over time. It just means change over time, okay? And that's going to develop through what we call natural selection and then because of adaptation. All right. The accumulation of changes is the textbook definition here that occur in those organisms as they adapt to their environments, and the vehicle is going to be natural selection. That's kind of what picks what's a good trait to have and what's not a good trait to have. This happens all throughout the planet. We actually use this as human beings to do things like make certain breeds of dogs. That's really just evolution. It's just change over time. Okay. And it is a proven theory. All right. And we need to understand theory outside of the everyday connotation of the word because that is often misunderstood. A theory in science is not something that we think. It is something that we know. It has undergone years and years of testing. It has not been able to be disproved. It's been very well studied, very well established. Natural phenomenon based on mathematical proofs. This is not some not random guess. This is not like the theory of who shot JR, who shot JFK. Okay. JR, that's aging me. That's going back to a soap opera a long time ago. Or even, these theories about who shot Kennedy. Okay. That's theory in the everyday connotation of the word. A theory and a law are also not necessarily two completely distinct things. I've had a lot of students that were taught that theories grow up to become laws, and that's not true. Because they're two sides of the same coin. Okay. A theory tells you what happens and a law tells you why it happens. All right. So really important to understand that. Microbes are really closely tied to the flow of energy and food throughout Earth's ecosystem. The primary process that this occurs through is through photosynthesis. Bacteria were the first to do photosynthesis long before the first plants ever appeared on Earth. So photosynthetic bacteria are very important. They were really primarily what was responsible for changing and making the environment for the atmosphere of Earth from one that did not have oxygen to one that did contain oxygen. So we would not be here if it weren't for bacteria, photosynthetic bacteria, or other photosynthetic microbes. So this later led to the development of the ozone, and that ozone layer acts as a blanket over Earth and helps Earth to stay a little bit warmer and stay a little bit more temperate. Then we also had the explosion of species diversification because of this. After these things occurred, 70% of Earth's photosynthesis actually still comes from photosynthetic microorganisms like bacteria and algae, which is pretty astounding. There's just so many of them. So maybe it's been a while since you've had biology or anatomy. Maybe you didn't take anatomy with me and you're not as familiar with what is photosynthesis. Well, let's remind ourselves. Photosynthesis is where we have light that comes from the sun. And remember, the sun is ultimately the source of all energy on Earth. It drives the conversion of carbon dioxide into an inorganic material like glucose, okay? And it's going to have the formation of oxygen as a byproduct. Okay, so at first it was not producing oxygen, but later on the process changed to one that produced oxygen. So oxygenic photosynthesis occurred in bacteria before plants evolved, did not produce oxygen, but it was much more efficient in extracting energy from the sunlight. And then a few million years later, which sounds like a lot, but really if you look at evolutionary time, it's not. It evolved from that process and became one that actually produced oxygen, which provided a landscape that we could not use the word landscape, not literally, but figuratively, that we could survive in. Microorganisms are the main forces that drive the structure and content of soil, water, and particularly the atmosphere, okay, or of particular importance. Earth's temperature is regulated by what we often call greenhouse gases. These are gases that are emitted from living organisms, and those are going to be things like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, that's at CH3 here. And those can be emitted from living organisms, okay? And that helps to insulate the earth, which helps to retain heat. We have microbes that live in the gut of animals like cows that help emit these particular gases here. Microorganisms are also the most abundant cellular organisms found in the ocean, which is actually quite phenomenal if you think about it. The ocean is vast and very, very large. Okay. Viruses are also the most abundant inhabitants, but those are for acellular inhabitants. Okay, so that's the difference there. Microorganisms are the most abundant cellular inhabitants, and viruses are the most abundant acellular inhabitants. So you probably want to add that in here. Okay. Um, so we have mutualistic symbiotic relationships that are very important. For example, bacteria help animals digest complex carbohydrates. That causes them to release large amounts of methane into the atmosphere, which helps to keep that blanket, basically, so to speak, that helps keep the earth warm. Bacteria also live on things like root nodules of legumes, which are a type of plant, and that helps those plants to obtain the nutrients they need, but also to fix nitrogen. Nitrogen fixation is basically taking nitrogen from the atmosphere and putting it into a usable form that those plants can use, which is a really pretty cool thing. Okay. We also have symbiotic relationships with microbes that live in our gut, like E. coli and other types of things. All right. Actually, all areas of our body, but that's what we're going to be learning about this semester. So, as I've already said, we think about microbes as being only pathogenic or disease causing. However, there are many, many more ways that bacteria are helpful to humans, or that maybe they just don't harm us at all. Okay. There's many more of those than those that are actually harmful. So microorganisms have been used for thousands of years. Things like baker's yeast. Okay, yeast is a microorganism. So we use that to make bread rise or ferment sugar into alcohol in order to make wine or beer. Fungi have been used to make certain cheeses or things like blue cheese dressing, which is pretty disgusting to me, but a lot of people really like it. Okay. It's also been used for certain types of treatments for wounds and lesions. It's been used in mining processes, and it's been used for things like bioremediation, which is where we have actually used microbes to clean up oil spills. Okay, so biotechnology. This is when humans use microorganisms to make products in an industrial setting. All right. This is going to include things like genetic engineering. This is where we change or manipulate the genes of microbes, plants, animals for creating new products like genetically modified organisms. We have been doing this for a very, very long time. If you look at original corn and corn that we have today, there are huge differences. Okay, so it's not just engineering or artificially placing genes into place, but also manipulate them, like I said earlier, with dog breeding. Okay. We do this, however, if we're talking about the technical aspects through processes like recombinant DNA technology. And this is really cool. This is where we transfer, and this is what you're thinking of when you think of genetic engineering. We transfer genetic material from one organism to another to actually alter the DNA. This is really basically like cut and paste for DNA, which is really pretty cool. You use something called a restriction enzyme, and you go in and you cut out what you want. You use a virus or bacteria to get it into the cell where you want it, and then you paste the DNA you want to replace it with. I mean, it's literally cut and paste. It's the coolest thing ever. Anyway, so we've used, let's see, I got off track there. So we're able to transfer those genes and change the DNA. We've also used microbes to make products, like I said earlier, drugs, hormones, enzymes like insulin that have been produced by bacteria. And then bioremediation, I have also already mentioned. This is the use of bacteria to do things like clean up toxic pollutants, like the oil spill, like when we had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We actually used bacteria to help break that oil down into smaller pieces. And some actually like to eat on petroleum products. It's a food source for them, so it's really very helpful for this. We can clean up other toxic pollutants and help restore stability to an ecosystem. Microbes have a great ability to break down chemicals that are otherwise harmful to other organisms. So when I said that they're actually kind of complex metabolically, that's what I meant. They can use different things like petroleum and methane and iron and sulfur for actually as food products, which is pretty helpful when we need to clean those up. Of course, our concern is going to be generally the microbes that harm humans because we want to be able to heal them. So pathogenic microbes are those that cause disease. We have over 2,000 different microbes that can cause illness, and any disease that is caused by a microbe is called an infectious disease, okay? And these, let's see, 2,000 different microbes, 10 billion infections across the world every year, and infectious diseases are one of the most common causes of death, which is very real to us now after what we have just gone through with COVID. So here you can kind of see highlighted in pink diseases that are clearly associated with the cause or being caused by microorganisms. They're an important cause of death because they kill a significant percent of the population. Among these, the top one is going to be respiratory diseases. That's going to be the leading cause of death due to microorganisms. All right. So below that, you're going to see here influenza and pneumonia, and then diarrhea causing diseases and things like tuberculosis. All right. So these here in pink are what are caused by microorganisms. So we have begun to witness or see an increase in the number of new or emerging, which is emerging, and resurgence of older, which we would say are re-emerging diseases like AIDS, hepatitis C, Zika, tuberculosis, okay? And so some of these are new, some of these are going to be more re-emerging. And the longer we have things like people that aren't wanting to get their vaccinations, this anti-vaccination movement, we're going to see reemergence of much more deadly microbes or microorganisms, okay? Human activities in deforestation, industrial large-scale farming, antibiotic uses has also fostered the emergence and reemergence of particular infectious diseases. Research has shown that there are way more associations between non-infectious diseases and microbes like H. pylori than we ever thought. H. pylori was recently discovered. I remember this in the 80s. Gastric ulcers up until this time were thought to be caused only by things like stress. But it was found that Helicobacter pylori actually could be a bacterial cause and that you could actually treat that particular type of gastric ulcer with an antibiotic, which was really astounding, okay? But we have seen associations, we don't quite understand them yet, with things like schizophrenia, multiple sclerosis, OCD, obesity, and many, many other things that are actually linked to chronic infections because of microbes. So it's really, like I said, a very important area of study. We're also finding connections between things like dental plaque and heart disease. And so there's lots of research in this particular field. Okay, and so one thing we're going to talk a lot about is the fact that many microbes are opportunistic. Okay, this is an important aspect for understand. That means that they aren't going to be a problem for us unless there is someone that is immunocompromised, or perhaps they are in the wrong place. Someone that is immunocompromised are more susceptible to a certain microbe than a normal, otherwise healthy person. All right, so we're going to look at this in more detail, and you're going to hear me talk about opportunistic pathogens quite a bit.